Good morning. I'd like to call this subcommittee hearing of Government Operations Subcommittee of the House Government Oversight and Reform Committee to order. Welcome everyone this morning, and the topic of today's hearing is the Federal Government approaches to issuing biometric IDs. And looks like a relatively brief hearing, but we have two witnesses that will be participating, and I'll introduce them shortly. The order of business will be we'll hear members' opening statements, and then we'll hear from our two witnesses, and then we will have a round or rounds of questioning as appropriate. So with that, let me again welcome everyone, and I want to again state on behalf of the committee that we believe we have a very important mission of oversight. This committee exists for a very fundamental purpose and two basic principles. First, the American people have the right to know how their money is spent, and Washington, it's taken from them. We have the fiduciary responsibility of seeing how it is expended and what programs are successful, what are unsuccessful, making certain, first of all, that the American public and our nation is secure. And then I think, finally, the American public deserves an efficient, effective government that works for them. We have that important responsibility in this committee, and we intend to protect those rights. So we want to hold government accountable for the taxpayers and make certain that we, through these hearings and the proceeding today, that we keep the executive branch and others charged with important responsibilities true to the intent and legislative purpose that Congress has set forth. So that's our purpose. I look forward to working with Mr. Connolly, our ranking member, and members of the subcommittee to continue this effort, and thank them for their cooperation this morning. On November 25th, 2002, then-President Bush signed the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. That's more than a decade ago, and that legislation set forth the credentialing for individuals that are entering some of our port facilities and regulated facilities that accommodate vessels and maritime traffic. According to GAO, from 2002 to 2012, in excess of $500 million has been spent in that effort, some $540 million. About $250 million raised in fees from some of the workers and other folks, and then about $250 million in public money and grants. According to CRS, since we first issued the cards in 2007, about 2,001 cards have been issued. The cost initially was $129.75 for the past number of years, and there's a proposal now that some of the workers can extend their cards for a fee of $60. The card was intended from the very beginning, and having participated in that process, to have a biometric component, to be a secure, durable identification that could ensure the identity of those entering, again, those secure areas in our port facilities. We have had at least 4 hearings that I know of, and some on the Transportation Committee, some on some subcommittees reviewing the progress of this card. I think if you look at a poster child for programs that sort of run amok and do not get the job done, the TWIC card, as it's affectionately known, Transportation Worker Identification Card, is unfortunately the poster child, again, for not producing what I think Congress intended. Despite all the time that has lapsed, the hearings that have been conducted, GAO continues to find that TSA is failing to properly administer the TWIC program. The latest report we have has just come out, and this is March 2013. It cites a whole host of problems with the program. First of all, we wanted the card produced with biometric capability. The card has some capability, fingerprint. It doesn't have iris, as I understand it. The cards were issued since 2007. The cards have not had capability of having a reader. Congress had passed additional legislation trying to get the reader program engaged, and we'll hear today that while GAO is testing some of the equipment, that we still do not have readers deployed in a universal manner to read the cards. So what you have is a farcical system of a card that, and not by my evaluation, but previous GAO studies have shown is not what we intended. It is tamperable. It has actually been in testing by GAO. It has been found to be deficient, and again, it is a card that can also be easily reproduced. So what you have is, again, a card that's produced, great expense to individual workers, great expense to the government, does not have a guarantee that it is a secure card that is tamperable. It has become a joke among transportation workers because at almost every port they're now required to produce a driver's license or some other identification that is used for entry. So this sort of goes on and on after, again, spending an incredible amount of money. TSA and the independent tests that agent they found did not even have a clear record of baseline data for comparing operational performance at access points with the TSA readers. This is in the testing, and GAO went on to find that TSA and the independent test agent did not collect complete data on malfunctioning TWIC cards. I know this is a long explanation of where we are, but I think it deserves sort of an update for the record. We again are faced with more than a decade delay in producing what Congress intended. Now years have gone on trying to get a reader that is approved. The final thing I'll just point out to Mr. Connolly and other members is other agencies do have cards. Most recently, where's our cards here? Here's our TWIC card, a little mock-up of it. And again, I think some of you may have seen this before, the TWIC card. Again, flawed. Here's a clear card, which a private company has produced. And it actually has biometric, both fingerprint, and I think it's all 5 fingers, and iris, and it's in use. We found other agencies that have readers, and they also have cards that have both of the components that Congress was trying to get some years ago. So this is very frustrating, and the purpose of the hearing is to review where TSA is and where we're going to go. So with that, I'd like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Connolly, if he doesn't take my coffee.
Sorry. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for your leadership in this issue and for holding this hearing. I can't help but observe there are two lonely members of the press at the press table. Yesterday we had dozens and dozens and dozens.
This isn't Benghazi.
Yeah,
Mary.
and yet the Benghazi hearing basically uncovered nothing. And actually today's hearing potentially has so much more of an impact in terms of U.S. security. But I guess it's not a particularly sexy subject, at least when it comes to the media. But I think it is very important to our country's security. And again, I thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman. I know you cared about this in your previous capacity at Transportation and Infrastructure as Chairman, and I am so glad you bring that sensitivity to this committee as well. All of us want to make sure that our transportation system is secure. Every day, our transportation system moves more than 1.4 million shipments of hazardous materials, any of which could be potentially of harm to Americans. As we all know, securing all of this cargo is very daunting, but we know it's imperative to the safety of the nation. The Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002 requires the Department of Homeland Security to issue a Biometric Transportation Security Card, TWIC, to identify individuals who will be allowed unescorted access to the secure areas of ports and vessels. The biometric information contained in the card includes, of course, as the Chairman indicated, fingerprints and a digital photograph. TSA is responsible for the issuance of the card, while the United States Coast Guard is responsible for enforcing its use. TWIC cards are intended to be utilized with an electronic reader that would simply scan the card to determine entry into the respective facility. Under the Safe Port Act of 2006, DHS was required to conduct a pilot program on the efficacy of the TWIC card readers. Unfortunately, the most recent GAO report, which we are going to hear about today, found significant methodological problems with the study. Specifically, GAO determined that TSA lacked data analysis plans, performance standards, or sampling methodology development prior to selection of participating facilities and vessels in the TWIC reader pilot. In addition, GAO also found that the finalized TWIC cards did not undergo any level of durability testing, which is problematic considering the use of these cards will be in sometimes harsh, wet maritime environments, which was also cited by the GAO report. These findings are disappointing and of great concern. I, for one, want to know why the Department has not responded favorably to GAO's serious findings, if in fact they have not. We look forward to hearing it today. If the readers in the TWIC cards fail to function properly, not only will maritime workers not be able to perform their jobs adequately on a daily basis, but these facilities are left vulnerable to a potential security breach. Given the volume of cargo coming into the United States, that is of great concern. The United States transportation system and maritime facilities remain a target and a means through which terrorists seek to attack the homeland. We all know that an attack on our nation's maritime transportation system could have very serious consequences. And it seems to me all of us have got to do everything in our power to make sure that does not happen. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses this morning and what corrective measures we can take to make TWIC an effective security card. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Connolly. And also, I'll just explain for the members of the panel that we had attempted to look at IDs across the board because TSA is at the heart of approval and DHS. It's at the heart of approval of moving all these ID programs forward. We were not able to get Customs and Border Patrol to participate today, nor Department of State and some others that we wanted. They wanted more time. So unfortunately, what we've done is divided this review up. We will, hopefully in a couple of weeks, and with the agreement of the minority, reconstitute the panel, and we will look at there are problems with the pilot's license. There are problems with the various cards that we have for identification, and at the airports we have a global entry under the Department of State. But I think all of these, and it's part of our responsibility. We're the only committee with enough jurisdiction to look at all of these, and then also TSA's responsibility. So we will follow up on that. With that, let me recognize Mr. Meadows, and then we'll go to the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, of the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member, Mr. Connolly, who has over and over again expressed a willingness to work in a bipartisan way to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse. And as we're here today, obviously looking at some $500 million spent on a program that is yet to be implemented, I'm reminded of the fact that there's two ways things get done here in Washington, D.C., slow and never. And we're trying to figure out which one of these this particular thing is going to be, because we've heard testimony in this very room of computer systems that we've spent some $1 billion on, then was never implemented. And so is this just another government program where it has great intentions of providing security, but in essence we're going to spend millions and millions and perhaps billions of dollars only to find out later that the theory or the genesis of this particular security system is one that is not going to be implemented. The most recent GAO report is troubling from some of the accusations and literally some of the research that it's providing here. And so I look forward to really let's looking at when are we going to have a system that secures our ports. We've been at this for some 11 years now. And so if not next year, then when? If not next year, then are we looking at another 10 years? What is the timeline? And from a practical standpoint, what are the deficiencies? Would we be better off to just say, we made a mistake, let's go back to the drawing board, let's find another area to do it? I have the privilege of having Google in my particular district. And I can tell you the type of security that is there with those facilities didn't take this long to get implemented in the private sector, and quite frankly are extremely secure. And so if the private sector can do it, certainly we, with all of our resources of the greatest nation in the world, should be able to figure it out. And so I look forward to your testimony. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
Thank the gentleman. Now pleased to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Connolly, for calling this hearing. And I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony. This is something that this is a subject that is of great interest to me because I previously served as the chairman of the subcommittee on the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation. And during my tenure in that position, I convened 2 hearings to examine the rollout of the TWIC card, which began unbelievably in 2007. Now, 6 long years later, 2.5 million transportation workers have been enrolled in the TWIC program, and 2.7 million TWIC cards have been printed. These enrollees have paid an estimated $300 million to implement this program. However, those TWIC cards are nothing more than very expensive flash passes without sophisticated electronic readers to read them. That's sad. We now know that many vessels and facilities will never use TWIC readers. Yet workers there are still being required to obtain the TWIC card. The Coast Guard, which is responsible for enforcing the use of the TWIC cards, has recently issued a notice of proposed rulemaking that would require only vessels and facilities in what are known as Risk Group A classification to utilize TWIC card readers. As a result, far less than 1% of regulated vessels and approximately 16% of facilities will require a TWIC reader. So the TWIC card is just a very expensive flash pass for all the mariners and transportation workers working in the 99% of vessels and more than 80% of facilities without TWIC card readers. But the problems with the TWIC card program run deeper than that. Where TWIC card readers will be required, they must be able to determine whether a card is valid and matches the biometrics of the individual who seek access to a restricted area in a port or on a vessel. Unfortunately, we cannot count on that. When the GAO reviewed the TWIC pilot program required by the Safe Port Act, it identified methodological problems with the pilot that are so severe, GAO has concluded that the results of the pilot are simply not reliable. I am stunned by the scope of the shortcomings identified by the GAO, particularly given that as long ago as 2009, GAO identified shortcomings that needed to be addressed to ensure the TWIC pilot program would yield reliable results. We are all aware that we need to take every effective step to protect our maritime facilities from those who wish to harm us. However, at this time, we still have no reliable data proving that the TWIC card is one of those steps. I can simply say I'm disappointed, and we are better than that. As my colleague said just a moment ago, if the private sector can do this, we ought to be able to do this. And we need to know exactly why we can't. And when I was chairman of the Coast Guard Subcommittee, Mr. Chairman, I constantly talked about, I was really talking about the Coast Guard and its acquisition program, but I talked about how we were moving into a culture of mediocrity. And I think this whole fiasco is a step below that. And so I'm hoping that we'll get some answers, that we'll get some results soon, so that the intended purpose of the TWIC card will be able to carry out the way we wanted it to be done. With that, I yield back.
Well, I thank the ranking member and concur in his very frank statement. We'll work together. We've got to figure out a way to get this program back on track. No other members this morning, so I will ask unanimous consent that members have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. Without objection, so ordered. So now we'll turn to our two witnesses this morning. First, we have Mr. Steve Sadler, and he's the Assistant Administrator for Intelligence and Analysis for the Transportation Security Administration. Then welcome back Mr. Steve Lord, and he's the Director of Forensic Audits and Investigative Services for GAO, the Government Accountability Office. So, if you gentlemen, this is an investigative panel of Congress. If you'll stand and be sworn, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that both witnesses answered in the affirmative. We aren't too pressed for time this morning, so we'll give you a little bit of leeway. Usually it's a little bit briefer, but we'll recognize first Mr. Sadler, the Assistant Administrator for Intelligence and Analysis at TSA. Welcome, and you're recognized, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about TSA's role in the TWIC program. TWIC is a fee-based program that issues a tamper-resistant biometric credential. Eligible maritime workers use TWIC for unescorted access to secure areas of port facilities and vessels regulated under the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. TSA's primary areas of responsibility include conducting security threat assessments, providing customer service at enrollment centers, and engaging industry to develop specifications for TWIC readers. The full enrollment fee for a transportation worker is $129.75, and an initial TWIC is valid for 5 years. Under the Extended Expiration Date Initiative, eligible workers may request a 3-year extension by paying the $60 card replacement fee. Currently, the United States Coast Guard requires maritime operators to visually inspect the TWIC prior to granting unescorted access to secure areas. Under MITSA, the Coast Guard currently regulates nearly 14,000 vessels and more than 3,200 facilities. With a single uniform credential, facilities, vessel operators, and law enforcement entities can verify an individual's identity and eligibility to enter secure areas with a higher level of confidence than was feasible prior to TWIC. TWIC is an important layer in maritime security as risk-based access control requirements and technical capabilities mature. TWIC readers determine whether a card is authentic and issued by TSA. The readers also check that the card is not expired and has not been revoked or reported lost or stolen. The Coast Guard recently published a proposed notice of rulemaking on TWIC readers in which the use of those readers would be required for certain high-risk vessels and facilities. Recently, several major challenges have converged for the TWIC program. These include the expiration, re-enrollment, and demand for replacement of 1.5 million TWICs over an 18-month period, modifications to the process to limit enrollment and card issuance to a single visit, and the transition of the program from a current single-provider contract to separate contracts for enrollment services and system operations. Beginning this summer, the first phase of an initiative to enable individuals to apply for and obtain a TWIC with a single visit to an enrollment center will be tested in Alaska and should expand nationwide in 2014. One visit represents the most significant program change since TWIC's inception and will greatly ease the burden on future applicants and individuals needing a replacement card. Additional customer service improvements include expanding the number of TWIC enrollment centers from 136 to more than 300, increasing call center representatives focused on reducing call wait times, developing a web-based process to apply for extended expiration date TWICs or replacement cards, and increasing mobile enrollment opportunities to facilities wanting to enroll workers on-site. As a result of the TWIC pilot program, we obtained considerable data and sufficient quantity and quality to support the general findings and conclusions in the pilot report. Our analysis concluded that TWIC readers function properly when they are designed, installed, and operated in a manner consistent with the characteristics and business needs of the facility or vessel operation. The analysis also concluded that reader systems can make access decisions efficiently and effectively. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I will be glad to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. And we'll turn now to Mr. Steve Lord, the Director of, let me give you your full credit here, Steve. Okay. Director of Forensic Audits and Investigative Services for GAO. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Connolly, and Representative Meadows. I'm really pleased to be here today to discuss the results of our recent TWIC report issued just recently. I should point out this is not the only report we've issued on this subject. We have work going back several years, including a very significant study we issued in 2009 on the design of the pilot, as well as a May 2011 report on the internal controls in the program. The overall message that I wanted to convey today, I think it's a very important message, is that the pilot results should not be used to inform future decisions regarding the TWIC reader rule or the future deployment of card readers. This is where we disagree with TSA and DHS. And I'm also surprised to see that the Coast Guard went ahead and issued their March 22nd notice of proposed rulemaking because it incorporated the results of the pilot, even though we found major issues in the pilot data, which we had previously shared with them. I'd like to briefly touch on some of the key challenges we identified in the pilot. They fall into three major buckets. The first one is planning. Bottom line is DHS did not address the pilot planning weaknesses we identified in our 2009 report. Although it took some initial steps to address them, it did not develop a full evaluation plan or the performance standards we called for to help guide the pilot as it unfolded. The second key issue we identified was related to data collection. We identified 8 separate weaknesses in how the the pilot participants collected data. I'm not going to discuss all 8 today, but I would like to briefly highlight 3. First, TSA and the independent test agent did not record clear baseline data. If you don't have a clear baseline, you really have nothing to compare the collected data to. They also did not collect complete data on reasons for card failures or the reasons people were denied access to facilities. Obviously, they collected some, but we scrutinized the data they did collect, and we found several significant discrepancies and anomalies in the data. The third key data collection issue we identified was the operational impact of using TWICs with readers was not consistently documented. And this is a really important issue because this was one of the major reasons they ran a pilot, to measure the business impact on the private sector. Yet when we looked at how they measured that, they didn't do a good job, and they essentially did not collect the data needed to assess that issue. As a result of all the challenges we identified, we think it's really difficult to assess whether the problems experienced were due to the cards themselves, to the readers, or to the way the users were using them. So it could have been a combination of all 3, and that's something we highlight in our report. We also scrutinized DHS report to Congress. I should mention, we just didn't evaluate the report. We looked at what went into the preparation of the report. We pulled all available data sets that were used to support the February 2012 report to Congress. And one notable issue we identified was the assessments of the entry times at ports. Again, the throughput times, this is a really important issue that was looked at, where these measures were mixed up with reader response times, which is the time it takes a card to be read in a laboratory setting. So obviously, they weren't really measuring throughput, which is a key objective of the pilot, but basically how time it took a card to be read in a laboratory setting. Given all the issues we identified, we do not believe using TWICs with readers provide a critical layer of port security. We think that has yet to be demonstrated, and that's why we called for the agency to implement our prior recommendation on that point, to do a security assessment, to try to identify the value added of using TWICs with readers. Is it better than the regimes used in the past or not? We think that's a really important issue. So that's why, again, we called for that in our 2011 report. And but we do acknowledge some of the many challenges that DHS experienced in the pilot. They were dealing with 17 different sites. They participated on a voluntary basis. They couldn't compel them to participate or collect data in a certain way. I mean, we recognize that, yet we still think some of those risks could have been mitigated by perhaps having more personnel involved at the sites or providing additional resources. So anyway, in closing, given the many issues we identified, as we highlight in our report, we think Congress should consider repealing the requirement that the final regulations for the card readers be consistent with the pilot findings. Essentially, we think those 2 issues should be delinked, given the issues we identified in the pilot. And instead, we believe Congress should require DHS to complete a security assessment, as we originally called for in our May 2011 report. Again, the security assessment will help demonstrate the value of the program. And the assessment should also include a comparison of alternative credentialing approaches. There's different options they could have considered. For example, the government can conduct a security assessment and have the credentials be provided at the local level. That was an option that was never considered in the early alternative analysis of alternatives, and we think that has possible merit that should be studied further. Thank you, Mr. Mica. Ranking Member Connolly, Representative Meadows, this concludes my prepared statement, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you, and we will start questions. I'll start with a round. First, Mr. Sadler, have you ever had the opportunity to see the movie Groundhog Day?
Yes, I did, sir.
And in that movie, doesn't the character keep repeating the same day over and over again and the sort of same thing over and over?
I believe he does, sir.
Yeah. I feel a little bit like that character, Mr. Connolly and Mr. Meadows. 2002, 2005, 2006, 2009, 2011. Last I checked, this is 2013. And we still do not have a viable TWIC program. And I just heard Mr. Lord go through his analysis of these reader test experiences. We've got his report here. It's very frustrating. I guess you did 17. There are 17 sites.
That's correct, sir.
Yeah. And we don't really know how many people went through. Let's see. DHS's report to Congress shows a total population of 33,111. This is the population. However, final pilot test site test systems and evaluations showed a population 79,000. There's a discrepancy even in the number of participants. Mr. Lord said that some you couldn't get some to participate. I guess that maybe that's it. The report says pilot participants did not document instances of denied access. TSA and the independent test agent did not collect complete data on malfunctioning TWIC cards. I mean, the report just goes on and on about again, what's supposed to be pilot testing to develop a card that we can use and have some basic knowledge about what's effective and how all this can be utilized. How do you respond to GAO?
So I would say that GAO, in their opening statement, pointed out some of the challenges that we faced when we started this pilot program. And that's a key point. This is a pilot program that we implemented in the commercial maritime environment. And no one has done that before. And I know you've heard that before, but that's the crux of the issue.
In a maritime environment?
No one has done this type of pilot that I know of in this type of environment. So we got voluntary participation from the facilities. We were very happy that these facilities stepped forward and participated, but we did this pilot under the conditions of an operational maritime port facility. So we couldn't put readers at every access point, whether it was for a vehicle, whether it was for a pedestrian. So those were some of the challenges that we faced. It was a voluntary pilot. It was in a maritime operational environment. Not all access points had readers. If we could have locked the place down and put a reader at every access point,
so you're saying it's not practical to have a reader with the TWIC program?
I'm not saying, no, I'm not saying that, sir. What I'm saying is
you couldn't test it
under the conditions we had to test, we faced challenges, and we stated those in our report to Congress as well.
Now, let me ask you a question. You've issued, what, 1.8 million of these? 2.5?
About 2.5 million, sir.
But is there 1.8 million coming due or something?
Well, there are about 1.5 million cards that are set to expire over the next 18 months.
I'm sorry, I messed up the figures, but so in the next 18 months you have 1.5 million. And do you have a card now that has a biometric component that would recognize both fingerprints and iris?
Sir, we use the fingerprint template only because that's the only Federal standard that's in existence today. And it was the most robust biometric.
And you're working with the folks that set the standards, and they have told us at several previous hearings that the standard was just around the corner for iris. What are they telling you now?
As I understand it, they're in their second iteration of the iris standard out for comment. And I don't know what their schedule is for a final publication of that standard. I'd have to defer to them.
Well, TSA, you also oversee entry programs. For example, the CLEAR program. I'm told that the CLEAR program has an iris and also I think all 5 fingers are incorporated. And this is in use in the airports, is that correct?
It may be, sir. I'm not aware that we're overseeing that program at this point. That's probably a relationship.
And TSA just lets anybody put a program in place?
It's not about TSA allowing the program. It's about a relationship between the contractor or that company and the airport. So what I would say about that is—
So do you accept these cards? These aren't accepted?
I don't know if they're accepted or not. I'd have to get back to you on that answer. As far as boarding an aircraft,
yeah,
I'd have to get back to you on that answer. What I'd say about that is we use a fingerprint template. We do not use an image for privacy purposes. We have to encrypt our biometric. I don't know if they encrypt their biometric. And also, if an individual comes up to a kiosk in an airport, that is much different than an individual who's in a tractor-trailer or a truck going through a gate trying to use an iris scan. If I could set every person going into a port coming up to a kiosk and take the time I needed to take that iris scan and embed that in the card, then we would do that. But that's not the way the port operates. Now, if the port wanted to use an iris, they can use an iris, and they can use a TWIC card as a pointer to get back to that biometric.
So basically, you're going to be issuing more than 1 million cards, reissuing the cards that have expired without an iris component, and I guess somewhat limited fingerprint component. I think one of the previous studies that Mr. Lord did was some of the flaws with the card, that they could be tampered with, and actually, I think on several occasions you thwarted the system. Is that correct, Mr. Lord?
Yes, we did some covert testing as part of our 2011 report, and as this report as well. We dispatched covert testers to basically conduct 2 types of tests. We presented fraudulent identification documents. We were able to obtain an authentic TWIC, and we also manufactured a TWIC. We basically made a fake TWIC, and we were able to access facilities using both types of credentials.
Did you use any of the fake TWICs to thwart the pilot?
At one site, they were using a reader, but it's my understanding they had some problems with false positives, so our undercover investigators were waved in even after the entry guard tried to swipe it and it wasn't working. She still provided them access to the facility.
Very good. Let me go to Mr. Conley. I want to be fair with the members that are here. Come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sadler, do you think the pilot program was successful?
I think the pilot program showed what we asked it to do, was that if the—
Well, time out. The pilot is the predicate for moving forward. It's kind of a critical question. Was it successful? Because GAO says that not only was it not successful, they're recommending that Congress decouple future regulations and standards from the pilot. Do you disagree with that?
I think it was successful in what we intended to do, which was show that if that reader was installed properly, if the operator was trained properly, if the individuals were trained properly in the use of the card, and that reader was put in place based on the business requirements of that port, then the reader did its job with the TWIC card.
Mr. Sadler, we just heard testimony, and there's more in the report. You didn't test for durability. Durability of the card actually could be very important in terms of long-term security. The wet conditions are a problem in terms of accurate reading. You just heard Mr. Lord say they actually manufactured a fake card, and sadly that fake card passed muster, that all too often the differentiation between the fake card and the TWIC card failed in the readers. Now, you think that's just a matter of fine-tuning, or do you think that not, does that not, and by the way, another aspect of the GAO report is the cost figures were so flawed as to not be reliable, and they caution Congress, don't read too much into that because, you know, the methodology, frankly, is not really an accurate picture of what it cost. What aspect, pray tell, of this pilot could be considered successful such that we could have confidence in moving forward?
So if someone uses a card that's fraudulent, and I think it was shown in this case, that the reader would not read that card. So that individual who came up with that fraudulent card did not get a positive read off the reader, from what I understand. And if the individual was allowed into that facility, the person should not have been let into that facility without a business need.
Time out. Mr. Lord, tell us how it worked.
The card reader did not, rejected the card. The person was allowed to enter the facility based on what they referred to as social engineering, some discussion with the guard, the security guard.
So they were able to bypass the card system entirely?
Yes. They were able to basically talk their way in.
So you're saying that's not really a failure of TWIC, that's a failure, that's a breach of security protocols in general?
What I'm saying is, in that case, it appears that the card and reader did their job. They didn't have a positive identification for that individual, and then the individual talked to the security guard, apparently.
So it's a separate issue.
Guard, that's a different issue completely than the card itself or the reader. If that person didn't have a business need to get into that port, that person should not have left in.
But how do you respond, Mr. Sadler, to Mr. Lord's and GAO's recommendation to the Congress that the lack of efficacy of the pilot is such we should pass legislation to decouple it from moving forward?
I think
that's a pretty rare recommendation coming out of GAO.
I think that the TWIC card and reader, when installed properly, provides security value at the port. It's not a silver bullet. It's part of our layered security, and I think it provides value when it's used properly and installed properly.
Can you point to a place where it's been installed properly and it works, and therefore we should have confidence in it?
In some of the pilot locations, it has been installed properly.
For example?
There was in a Long Beach port, there was one single gate through the back, and I believe it was Long Beach. It might have been Los Angeles. I'd have to go back and check. There was one single gate where if you came into that back gate, you had to use the card, you had to use the reader. It worked, and we didn't see any appreciable backup in the flow of traffic. And I'll go back and confirm that.
All right. Yeah, I wish you would. I spent 20 years before I came here to Congress in the private sector, and in two organizations that do a lot of security work, including port security, I might add, and I spent 14 years in local government. The practice in both local government and in the private sector, when we were looking at a challenge, was to first look at best practices. We benchmarked ourselves against the competition. I'll use local government rather than the private sector, but I mean, I represented Fairfax County, a pretty advanced, county government, big local government. So we would compare ourselves to DuPage in Illinois and, Los Angeles County, and depending on the subject matter, how are they doing it? What are they doing? How does it work? What can we learn from their lessons? Did we do that before we decided to embrace TWIC as the answer to port security going forward? Well, because the Chairman pointed out that there are other examples, seemingly, of cards that do seem to work and processes that do seem to work. What have we learned from those that we're trying to apply to what seems to be a flawed process here?
Well, we were required by Congress to issue the biometric credential, and we are doing that. I think part of the issue here is when you
excuse me, Mr. Sadler, if I may interrupt just one second. We take that point. The Chairman addressed that. The cards he gave you as an example that seem to work also include biometric data. This is not unique to TWIC.
Those cards are not working in the same environment we're working in.
Your argument is that the port environment, the maritime environment, is unique and has special requirements.
Yeah, the port environment is unique. And as far as durability of the card goes, and some of the analysis that we saw, the card was equivalent, the use of the card was equivalent to use by DOD, use by park rangers. So this is a very tough environment. It's not the same as coming up to a kiosk in an airport, which is inside, which is a controlled environment. So I would say, yes, it is unique.
All right. My time is almost up, but if I could just add one last question on that. Mr. Lord, could you respond to that? I mean, what about that? This is a unique environment, and some of your criticisms might be more applicable if we were talking about access to an office environment in the commercial office building. but you're not being cognizant of the unique attributes of the maritime environment.
No, I think we are. We fully recognize the harsh maritime conditions the card is used within. The analogy we drew on our report was to the DoD CAC card. That card, in contrast to the TWIC card, is durability tested after it's personalized, which tends to introduce some vulnerabilities in the card when you add little unique features. And that was, to me, an important distinction between the TSA approach and the DoD approach. As you noted, if you've ever been abroad, Iraq, Afghanistan, that's the common access card they use in those types of environments, which we think is a pretty harsh environment as well. And those cards are considered a success because they're considered more durable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to pick up on some of the line of questioning that the ranking member brought up with regards to the pilot program and the existence. Why we have a pilot program is hopefully to make determinations on whether we should proceed. Well, you're saying that it's a congressional thing. And, Mr. Sadler, I'm sorry to point all these questions to you. This is not a personal thing. And obviously, I'm looking to you for guidance on what we need to go forward with, because we've had, according to my research, 6 or 7 studies already by GAO in terms of recommendations on this particular thing. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact number, sir, but there's been quite a
number of them?
Yes, sir.
And each time, from what I understand, you have agreed, or your agency has agreed to the recommendations that the GAO has made. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I believe that's correct.
Okay. And so I guess my question is, why have those not been followed up on or really truly implemented? Is it because of the weather conditions that you're talking about?
I think it's because that's part of it. It's not necessarily the weather conditions. I think the weather conditions.
Well, I know that maritime
part of it
constitutes salt water generally, and not always, but many times salt water. And I know that salt just eats the hell out of anything. And so when we have this technology, is this something that could be viable long term, or are we going to be spending another $3.2 billion 5 years from now to replace readers?
No, I think what we found in the pilot was that if the reader was installed properly and covered properly, that cut down on a lot of the issues.
Okay, and you've installed those readers at 17 ports, is that correct?
17 ports, 100 access points.
For the cost of $500 million?
No, the total cost of the pilot that we conducted to the ports was $15 million, and to the government approximately $8 million. So the total amount of money expended for this pilot was $23 million.
All right, so we're about $23 million there for the pilot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you've issued about 2.5 million cards. Is that correct?
That's correct also.
So how many of those cards have been lost or stolen?
I'd have to get back to you, sir, with that number. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Do you think you know exactly the number of cards that have been lost or stolen at your agency at this point?
I think we'd have a pretty good idea. I don't know if we'd have an exact number.
So everybody that loses a card or has one stolen with the transient nature of employment would call you and let you know?
They would have to call and get a replacement card.
Only if they were trying to get back in. But if they lost it and they were unemployed, would they call you?
If they needed the card, they would call us.
But only if they needed it. My point is when we have this, and we're looking at this biometric there, if these cards are transient and you have no kind of iris screening that would connect them, a card, for $1 million, maybe I give my card to somebody else. So does it actually provide a more secure environment? I mean, with the transient nature of this and with nothing that is actually tied to the person that you issue it to.
We can't eliminate that risk, sir. We can try to mitigate it, and that's why I would say we need the readers.
All right.
Just as the GAO mentioned, when they tried the card where a reader was positioned, it didn't acknowledge that card. It was social engineering that got it through, not a fraudulent twist.
So if you were to come back before Congress and say, well, we're doing this because Congress told us we had to do it, if we were to put forth a piece of legislation today that says Congress changed its mind because this is not a wise investment of a hardworking American taxpayers' dollars, would you endorse that?
Well, we would try our best to comply with whatever statute Congress passed.
But, I mean, but if you were in my shoes, would you put forth a piece of legislation, knowing what you know over the last 11 years, that we've spent over $500 million and we're still yet to have secure ports, would you make that recommendation? If you were going back home and people were going to say, well, you know, it's my money, are you being responsible? Is that the kind of decision you would make?
I would say that TWIC is what I would tell my constituents, I would say TWIC is a valuable security tool.
It's a valuable security tool.
Yes, and I believe that.
You make that based on 17 installations out of 360.
17 installations, 100 access points, 156 readers, 400,000 pieces of data.
Okay. How sure are you that we're only going to spend $3.2 billion to implement this? I mean, on a level of 10 being the highest, that you're absolutely confident. How sure are you, Mr. Sadler?
Well, the life cycle cost estimate that was conducted, I believe, in 2005 had a limit of $694 million up to $3.2 billion. So we're...
Are you, during the pilot, have you had cost overruns? Cost overruns during the pilot?
Well, it's no, sir, because it's...
Because there was no budget. So it's hard to go over and under.
No, there was a budget.
Okay,
there was $23 million in grants that were let to the facilities. There was $8 million let to TSA, and it's a fee-funded program. So if you have a fee-funded program,
so as long as they're paying for it, you don't go over budget. Because I'm reading in the GAO, there were some concerns with regards to some of the issues and how we implement this, and we've got obviously a government-centric focus here. Do you think we ought to reevaluate that and go with something that's not government-centric? Or is the government the best place to provide security here?
I don't know exactly what you mean, sir.
All right. Well, it's all about calling into a government call center to provide these particular cards, and as we look at that, it's all about the government providing. Could a private agency do a better job than we're doing?
I don't think so, sir, because a private agency is not going to have access to the information we have access to make those decisions.
So there's no private security that could provide that. So you're saying basically because of the information with regards to the matrix, with fingerprinting, et cetera.
In my opinion, I think that's correct.
So your recommendation is to continue to go forward with this plan?
My recommendation is to implement readers in the maritime environment.
Okay. So when and I can see my time is up, so let me finish up with this line of questioning. We've been here for 11 years. We've yet to have really new port security. In fact, you even mentioned that we have issues. The GAO report mentions that we have issues. So we don't have a more secure environment in 11 years. At what point can I tell my folks back home that we're going to have more secure ports? Is it 5 years, 6 years? You know, you've got $3.2 billion to spend. So at what point do we have more secure environment?
You can tell them that today, sir.
So it'll be more secure today?
It's already more secure. You've got a common credential. You've got a consistent security threat assessment that nobody's done.
So you've reached your objective?
No, sir.
So my question, you know what I'm meaning. At what point do we reach our objective, Mr. Sadler?
We reach our objective when we get readers installed.
All right. So which will be when?
I defer to the Coast Guard on their time schedule. They've got an NPRM out now. They're taking comments. They're going to adjudicate the comments.
So this is, we needed to have the Coast Guard here to figure out, and you're saying that they can implement it with the pilot results that you have right now?
I'm going to defer to the Coast Guard on which results from that pilot program they use and which they don't use.
So if it fails, whose fault will it be? Yours, TSA's, because of the pilot, or the Coast Guard for implementation?
That's a hard question to answer, sir. I'm the responsible executive at TSA for this program. So I don't think failure is an option. I know failure isn't an option, but that's a difficult question to answer because I'm presupposing that I know why it failed, if it does. And I don't believe that it will.
Well, the pilot should have told us that, but I'm way over time. I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Well, let me just follow up on that. Now, wait a second. You're shifting the responsibility to Coast Guard, but you provided the Coast Guard the data on which they're going to evaluate their response to you. Is that correct?
Sir, I'm not shifting responsibility to the Coast Guard. What I said was We provided data to the Coast Guard.
But Mr. Lord said that the data you provide, I mean, his whole report shows that the data is flawed and that the test results can't, you didn't even have a clear baseline data from which you started. So a GAO, this isn't, you know, Mr. Connolly and I, Mr. Cummings and the others that were here, we're not, our investigators did not go after this. We rely on GAO to evaluate what you're doing with the pilot program. And they came back with one of the most critical reports I've seen. So again, you're telling us that you're giving the data, and then Coast Guard is going to evaluate it based on the data, which is flawed according to GAO.
Well, we believe there's meaningful data in that pilot report. We provided that to the Coast
Guard. You cited one place where you thought this worked at some back gate, and you weren't sure if it was.
Well, you asked me for an example, sir, and I gave you that example.
But that's at one back gate.
And the reason I gave you that example was because that was a controlled gate. That wasn't an area where you might have 8 gates.
How much have we
with
spent
only
on the
2
pilot?
readers.
How much have we spent on the pilot project?
$23 million.
$23 million. Pretty good, Mr. Connolly. We got that one back gate secure. And all this data that was collected without reliability. Mr. Lord, I thought you said that others could do this and in harsh conditions. And
Sure. Before I respond to that, I think I'd like to address one point Mr. Sadler raised. I think there is broad agreement among most stakeholders that there is some value in the program, and that's the background check that's conducted.
Yes, and you know, he didn't do a very good job on that. If I were him, I would have said, well, we've stopped 50,000 people from actually getting the cards.
But I agree with Mr. Sadler. He did mention that was one of the values of the program. But beyond that, I think that's where, to us, it gets a little fuzzy, because that was one option that wasn't really considered at the start of the program. What if the government did this the background checks, and we left the issuance of the credential to the local ports? That's essentially what they do with the SIDA model, with the airports.
We also have an issue, and actually this became an issue. I forgot Mr. Connolly and I were discussing. I was telling him in South Florida about 25% of our port workers had criminal backgrounds. And this actually came into Congress, I think, Mr. Connolly, as to how what we could consider in background checks. What do you consider now as far as? I thought we set the standard, because I know it became a big brouhaha.
They do criminal history records checks.
But how far back? And was it you couldn't do state checks versus federal or something? What is the status of that?
It depends on the disqualifying crime. Some crimes, such as murder, is an unlimited look back. Other crimes are 7 years or 5 years from release of incarceration.
I think that's what we got into. Yeah. So we had, you could have done.
But we do use state records. We receive state records from 40 states now that we utilize in a background check.
Well, again, we spent $23 million just on the pilot program. We are 11 years away from when we passed the initial legislation. We don't have a reader. We're going to issue, again, another million-plus cards, and they don't have the capability that Congress originally intended, because, again, you say another agency has not set the standard for IRIS. Any hope of when, again, we could actually see this happen if we go through the Coast Guard process, any processes that you have, and then when would you pick a reader, guesstimate, and then when would they be deployed? Will it be in, the next decade or?
Well, sir, I'd have to defer to the Coast Guard on the timeline as they're promulgating the rule. So I can't answer that question.
You're going to let the Coast Guard, who actually issues the TWIC card, the Coast Guard?
No, we issue, that's our responsibility to issue the TWIC.
I thought the Coast Guard was sort of the enforcement agency.
They are.
And they do a great job. Thank God for the Coast Guard, because they are there 24/7, low pay, and guarding the ports at entry points far beyond these gates, and also making certain that our maritime facilities are secure. But, okay, let's work this out. You know, remember my Groundhog Day? I want to know how many more times we're going to do this. So you've got the Coast Guard now, this rulemaking. Is that an open-ended thing, or is it their time frame?
A 90-day comment period from March 22nd.
Okay, and then you expect them to digest this? Are they going to get back with you? What's the process? Explain.
The process is that they have public meetings. They have
after the rulemaking or during the rulemaking?
During this 90-day period.
And then we got to that, and then okay.
And they receive written comments.
I got to 90 days.
90 days.
And then what's going to happen?
They take the written comments. They take the verbal comments from their public meetings. They adjudicate those comments, and then they start to develop the final rule.
And any guess as to?
No, sir, I don't.
No guess.
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Lord.
Yes, I think it's worth noting the Coast Guard recently extended the comment period by 30 days. It may be beneficial, given all the issues we discussed at today's hearings, to perhaps extend it another 30 days to get additional stakeholder comments. I imagine there's going to be a lot of comments generated in the next few weeks.
Well, again, I just, Mr. Sadler, how long have you been with TSA?
Since September 22nd, 2003.
From the beginning. So you've been there to see that this has been something we've tried to put into place for more than a decade, and we seem to, at every turn, not make the progress that Congress originally intended. We don't, again, have a card, I think, that is adequate, and we don't have readers or a program really to get a reader in place. So it's very frustrating. We spent $500 million on this, and we've got a card now that is flawed, and not by my definition, but by GAO's evaluation. Mr. Lord, have you got any idea how this will all end?
I really don't, sir. That's more a matter for Congress and the executive agencies. Our role was simply to respond to the mandate and the Coast Guard Authorization Act to study the results of the pilot and provide a report to Congress. So that's what we did. On the other hand, we have reported extensively on other TWIC-related issues in the past. So it will be interesting to see how it progresses after today.
Well, I believe there's been enough models out there and enough opportunities to adopt a better system. It may not be flawless, but for the money we've spent and for the results we've gotten, this is a pitiful commentary to be here May 2013 and still in this situation. Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess in addition to just the facts here, I'm bothered by two Federal agencies coming to two different conclusions based on the data available. Mr. Lord and GAO have taken the position, if I understand it correctly, that the efficacy of the pilot is flawed such that we should not rely on it. It should not be a guide as we move forward, or something that can be adhered to as a guide, because it is so flawed in its methodology in almost all respects, except there are some ancillary things that produced positive externalities, but not by design, background checks or whatever. Mr. Sadler, if I understood your testimony correctly, you believe that's not correct, that there is reliable data, at least sufficiently reliable that you and the Coast Guard can go forward in expanding the pilot to other facilities. Is that accurate?
What I said, sir, was that I think there's enough reliable data to support the conclusions of the pilot itself, which are that the reader, when installed properly, operated properly, and when the individuals are trained properly, whether it's the operator or the individual with the TWIC card that the reader works properly.
And you say that the GAO report and evident lack of confidence in same notwithstanding.
I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat that?
You are saying that fully aware of GAO's findings and reports that come to a very different conclusion.
Well, that was our conclusion when we wrote the pilot report that we sent to Congress. So, yes, that's what I'm saying. So we agree in many areas with GAO, and we have to agree because our pilot report itself pointed out many of the same challenges that GAO pointed out as well. So we admitted to those, and we know it's a challenge.
But here's the fundamental difference, Mr. Sadler. GAO has come to the conclusion that those flaws, deficiencies, problems and lack of accurate data because of methodology flaws are of sufficient gravity that Congress should not rely on the pilot. You, in your position on behalf of TSA, are saying quite the opposite. You are saying we are going to rely on it. We don't agree that it's so flawed that it can't be relied upon. And that's what I mean. Their findings notwithstanding, you intend to go forward based on the pilot, even though GAO is saying to Congress, we actually think you ought to decouple it from the pilot. It's that flawed.
Well, sir, we have to go forward. We've been directed to issue the credential. We've been directed to install readers. And unless Congress gives us other direction, then we're going to go forward. But we still stand by the fact that there was enough information gleaned from the pilot to support our conclusions in the pilot report. Then we take that information, we give it to the Coast Guard, and that's why I deferred to the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard takes that information and they use it based on how they think they need it, how they weight it, if they shouldn't use it. So I'm not shifting responsibility to the Coast Guard. It's just the fact that they're writing the rule.
Surely, Mr. Sadler, you can sympathize, though, with a taxpayer concern that if we have such a flawed entity in the pilot, why not acknowledge that and find another paradigm with which we're more comfortable? And there are other models that seem to work in harsh environments, albeit maybe not a maritime one, as opposed to slavishly sticking to the pilot because the statute cites it. I mean, you're here to give advice today as well as to be accountable to Congress. And if it is your studied judgment that, we did our college best, but the pilot failed, and or it is sufficiently flawed that, in good conscience, if you ask my opinion, I'd find something else as a model to base going forward on rather than the pilot. And I don't want to mischaracterize, but what I'm hearing you saying is that is not your opinion. Your opinion is the pilot, flaws and all, is going to give us sufficient data and is sufficiently efficacious that I have confidence that we can move forward based on what we learned from that pilot.
So, and I want to be careful how I say this because I do have to defer to the Coast Guard, but the pilot data is one of many sources that the Coast Guard used in promulgating their rule. So what I said and what I'll say again is that we believe we got sufficient data and sufficient quantity and sufficient quality to support the conclusions of that pilot itself, which was that if the readers are installed properly, people are trained properly, and they were purchased and installed based on the requirements of that particular port, then they work properly, and they can be used to help make access decisions. Those were the conclusions of the pilot.
Okay. The record will show that is in distinct contrast to the GAO point of view. Okay. Mr. Lord, final set of questions, Mr. Chairman, if I may. You cited in our previous round of questioning harsh conditions in Afghanistan and Iraq, war conditions, and both of them lots of weather challenges too, I might add. I've been to both. But they use an access card that includes biometric information. Is that correct?
Yes, it's called the Common Access Card, the CAC card.
CAC card. And how many CAC cards have been issued?
That's a good question. I'm not the subject matter expert on that. I know just from personal experience, I was deployed to Iraq for GAO for 3 months, and I had one, and it seemed to work, and never had an issue with it.
Hundreds of thousands of contractors?
Absolutely, and the servicemen themselves.
And the servicemen, hundreds. Well, when you look at the total number of come through Afghanistan and Iraq, it's well over $1 million, probably, right?
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of these cards issued. Maybe, I don't know if it approaches, the TWIC, but it'd be fairly comparable. Is that correct?
I believe so. I don't have the exact numbers. But again, I cited it as a success. That's an example where the government was able to issue.
I'm back to my benchmarking. We actually have an example and the challenge, the security challenge, is paramount. That's why we issued these CAC cards, to make sure bad guys don't get into sensitive facilities, or for that matter, even canteens, where lots of our servicemen and women are congregating, assuming it's a safe harbor. And it works, and it's been working for how long?
For how long? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I'm not. Again, I'm not.
Well, we've been at war for 12 years, so presumably most of the duration of that 12 years, almost paralleling the same time frame that the Chairman cited in his frustration, understandable frustration, where we've been trying to work this out in the ports. And I guess I just wonder, what is the likelihood we could perhaps learn from a successful lesson and try to apply it to TSA here?
Well, that's obviously an option. There is another option. It's not obviously my call, but they could rerun the pilot on a limited scale and resource it and oversee it correctly. That's obviously one option. Or you could pursue a different model, as you suggested. Have the government do the background checks and have the local ports provide the credential. That's what I call the hybrid option. But again, that's not my call. That's the Congress's call.
I know it is the Chairman's intention, perhaps, and I would join him in this if that's what he wishes to pursue, where we're going to hear from different examples of Federal agencies using these kinds of access cards, and undoubtedly we'll have TSA back. But it will be most instructive to hear more about how the DoD has successfully managed to create and deploy a card that seems to work.
In harsh conditions. Actually, they would probably be a very good witness to have at your upcoming hearing.
I thank you very much. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I thank you for holding this hearing. It's most illuminating.
Well, thank you, Mr. Conley, and we'll work with you. I think, again, our intent is to sort of end this Groundhog Day and not have another one of these hearings. Again, there's just so many of them. I just was reminded by the staff, Mr. Conley, that we had, I forgot about this, but we had a one-year pilot program testing the readers back in 2006 at the Port of New York and New Jersey. And we had collected data on fingerprints at that juncture. But we've done that pilot program. We've done these pilot programs. Now we're at this stage, and Mr. Lord said it might be valuable to go back and do another pilot program, again with some data that's reliable. Mr. Sadler, you said we spent $23 million on this pilot. Is there any money left?
I believe there's some grant money, and out of the $23 million, as I understand it, the ports expended $15 million of the grant money. And I'd like to make a comment on the DoD, and maybe Mr. Lord can answer this. The DoD may be used in the contact mode only, and I don't know if that's accurate or not. And what we need to do is,
it's amazing that you are you the head of this program for TSA?
I'm the senior responsible executive.
And you don't know about the other programs?
If they're using a CAC card, that's a contact.
Well, I think the first thing I would do,
that's a contact
if I were the head
biometric,
of this,
sir.
Mr. Conley, wouldn't I find out what works? Is somebody doing it? Are we
well, I will tell you, sir, contact is not going to work in the maritime environment. And if the CAC card is using a contact biometric where you have to put the card into a reader and put a pin in, you are not going to get trucks and individuals through those gates using a contact mode. Now, to fix that problem, we actually developed a specification with industry to wirelessly transmit an encrypted biometric. There is no standard in the Federal Government for that today. So if we compare models, we need to compare similar models.
Mr. Sadler, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
If I could just follow up on the Chairman's point, Mr. Sadler. Would you, I mean, I'm not trying to put you on a spot, but instead of theorizing about what CAC does or does not do or whether it's applicable or it's not applicable, how about finding out? Would it be worth it? Would you be willing to commit that TSA is going to actually look at how CAC works?
Not just CAT, Mr. Conley, but others. There are programs that do work.
And let's see if we can't fold that into our experience with our own pilot and see if we can't make a better product. Our interest here is success. It's not laying blame. And we'd like to partner with you, but if we have a model that's successful, and you may be absolutely right, it may not fully be applicable, it may not be applicable at all, but trucks have to go to remote locations in Afghanistan and previously Iraq, long convoy, so there may be some comparable aspects of this that we could benefit from. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to make that commitment, that you're going to look at that to see if there are aspects of it that could be relevant as we fold in lessons learned in the pilot.
We'll look at anything, sir, to make this pilot better and to make the result better.
I thank you for that commitment.
And my comment was not meant to infer otherwise.
And maybe we'll give him about 60 days or something like that, Mr. Conley. Call him back and see what he has learned that's out there that may be applicable. Get an evaluation of where they are. Again, maybe you could come back to the committee with a better timeline. We've got this 90-day review in place. And then maybe if there's money left over, Mr. Lord, and this report says that some of the basis by which you're proceeding is flawed, even the evaluation that's, or the data that's given to Coast Guard by which you're making a further evaluation isn't up to date. But, my God, this thing is going on forever. We do not have reader. The other thing, too, is staff, I want you to, what's the agency that sets the standard for the IRIS, the National Institute of
NIST.
Yeah. Could you write them and ask them when they think they'll have that standard set? I've had them before Congress several times. I'd just be curious if you would write them, and then I'll ask the committee staff, we'll sign a letter together when they'll have this ready. It was coming some years ago in the summer, and then it was coming in the fall, and then it was coming in the January. We still don't have this. And then maybe if we don't, we could find some standards that Congress could adopt or something. But to issue cards that do not have a biometric component that's reliable, cards that can be thwarted, which GAO has done in covert testing, and to have the system in place at great expense both to the truckers and the transportation workers, and maybe 129 doesn't sound like a lot to us, but to again have this this whole thing not working and not as it was set out to provide us with some firm identification. Now, we're just looking at TWIC. We're going to look at global entry. We're going to look at the Clear card. We're going to look at the pilot's license. All these IDs that TSA and Homeland Security have some say in, and try to see what we can do to ensure that we have better identification of folks, because we're putting ourselves at risk. We're not knowing who we're dealing with, and if we can know that, you can speed up the process, the inconveniences to passengers, to business, to truckers, to port personnel. So that's our intent. I want to thank, again, Mr. Conley for his involvement, Mr. Cummings, Mr. Meadows, and others. We have a small panel so we can have this nice exchange. We'll be back. There being, I guess, no further business before the subcommittee. And I thank the witnesses for being with us. I thank you, and the committee stands adjourned. Drives me nuts, nuts, nuts. Like invasion. This, I don't buy this. It comes in front of my door. And I don't like the